Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Amal Fakha will defend the academic thesis Improving the Implementation of Transitional Care Innovations. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis, Amal?
Yes, thank you. Dear Prorector, dear Assessment Committee, dear supervisors, dear family, friends, and colleagues. Today I'll present to you my project and the PhD for the past 4 years along the key findings and impact. So imagine with me, you are a 70-year-old. You are sitting in your living room surrounded by boxes of your personal belongings, and you are being told that today is your moving day. This is your last breakfast at home. Take one memory with you. You are going to a nursing care facility. These are care transitions. They are moments of movements between multiple healthcare providers and care settings. So for example, being at home and then needing to go to a hospital and then moving back to a rehab and ending up back at home. And this happens due to a change in the care needs. However, there's something very notable about these care transitions is that they are very common and frequent among older persons, age 65 and above, and most of the time with chronic diseases. However, these care transitions hold a lot of challenges when they do happen, and most notably also care fragmentation. So we see that during these transitions, there's often a low coordination and miscommunication that occurs between the different care providers. And further on, this poses many risks. So they are also known to be risky. And some of the risks are medication errors, at times rehospitalization, and of course, very common, a low quality of life for the older person. However, the question is, can we bridge the care transition gap? And the answer is yes, with transitional care innovations. However, what are these innovations? Transitional care innovations are known to, they are developed with two intentions, either to improve a needed and necessary care transition between different providers and settings, or to prevent an unnecessary one or avoidable. And they tend to have various pathways. So usually each innovation aims to focus on a certain pathway, let's say from hospital to home or nursing facility to the hospital. And each innovation is known to be constituted of a bundle of care services. And here I will demonstrate to you more in depth what an innovation could be in transitional care. And here, for example, you see one pathway moving from the hospital to home. And for example, these types of innovation, they have the core feature as transitional care nurse. And this nurse has the role of a primary care coordinator that really aims to improve the transition between the two settings. And mostly, the role of the nurse is to have an active engagement and support and education to the older person, but also to the family. And as you see at one side in the hospital, the nurse would perform in-hospital assessment, develop a care plan, and on the other side at home, the nurse would follow the older person and provide continuous support, as well as continuity of the old medical care. Moving on, those transitional care innovations, when we want to implement them in the real-world settings, the process is often complicated, and it holds a lot of challenges. It's often complex, messy, and at times it does fail. And therefore, our research question came in here: how can we improve the implementation of transitional care innovations? And in order to perform this question, we had two main objectives. The first is to explore the factors, which are what are the barriers that hinders the implementation, but also what could facilitate the implementation of these innovations. And the second objective, we wanted to determine which strategies could help the implementation of transitional care innovations. And therefore, we performed a series of studies, as you see here, along the relevant methodologies. So we started with a scoping review So we looked into the literature to explore what are the factors. Then the second one, we did a Delphi study with international experts on the subject to have a consensus on what are the most important factors. And then we moved into the field where we did a collective case study in Belgium. And in this case study, we studied the implementation of 4 transitional care innovations that dealt with improving the transition between the hospital and the home or community settings. And this study was solely from the perspectives of the healthcare professionals themselves that developed and implemented those innovations. And then the last study was the implementation mapping. It is a specific methodology to determine the strategies. And also, I would like to highlight that in the methods across all the studies, I used the consolidated framework for implementation research. It guided the research, and as you see here, it has 5 domains. It's a very commonly used framework. For example, regarding the inner setting, where it would tell you what are the factors that could be related to the, for example, the organizational setting that could influence the implementation of such innovations, as well as the other domains such as the outer setting or the individuals involved. So moving into the core results, so in order to answer our first question on what are the factors that influence the implementation, we performed the first 3 studies, and the studies are published as you see. And the main results from this 3 studies was that we could identify 20 diverse transitional care innovations. Yet the majority of the established or developed transitional care innovations aim to improve the care transition from hospital to home. It was the most common pathway. And also the key component, it was very common to have transition role, which as I just demonstrated, such as transitional care nurse or a care coordinator. And we could identify 25 prominent factors that influence the implementation of transitional care innovations. And moreover, we identified key barriers, and many were at the organizational level. For example, the structure of the organization, the availability of the resources, and also the continuity of the information. So at many times, there was this continuous information transfer between the care providers. And at the end, you see always how much it's an urgent to implement this innovation, or if it's a priority or not, played a big role. And also leadership was a very big factor. At times it was barrier, and talking with experts, doing the case study, it was always highlighted as a very and most important factor. Another key barrier was at the innovation level, and it's the targeted groups. So also we saw that a mismatch between the needs of the older person, their profile, what are their wishes, was not always met by the innovation. So we could see this was also a barrier. On the bright side, there were other facilitators, and mostly at the individual level. And this we saw a lot in the case studies. So when individuals are motivated, they are committed and enthusiastic, this drove the implementation and increased its chance of success. And at the process level, the engagement, so when we engage the key stakeholders, the older person, and everyone that really has an influence or is influenced by the innovation, was a very important facilitator. And of course, the transitional care roles. It stood as a very key facilitator across the different studies that we saw. And yeah, it was, again, rated as the most important factor. The second part of the results, or to me, the second objective, determining strategies, we actually combined the findings from the first 3 studies. And then, using these findings, we used the technique of implementation mapping. And we could determine a set of 40 implementation strategies for transitional care innovations that targeted 12 key factors. And these factors were based on the previous studies, how they are rated, and of course, the priority ones. And in the strategies, we had nearly almost half of the implementation strategies targeting the organization. And the strategies were based on theory, and also we try to look for evidence on their effectiveness. So at the organization level, you see structural redesign was a very common strategy, as well as when you diagnose the organization and provide feedback and increase its capacity to implement an innovation. We also had other strategies at the individual level, such as active learning, also more at the policy, such as advocacy and lobbying, and also at the innovation level, tailoring in order to meet the needs of the recipient, in this case, the older person. So these were the key findings, and moving into conclusions, our conclusion is to use always theory and evidence-based implementation strategies to improve the implementation of these innovations and to target the factors specific to it, such as the leadership, the key individuals, or the innovation design. And also another conclusion is we invite to understand early on the context and see really what is the surrounding of transitional care innovation, who's involved, the number of organizations, and also to try to align and boost the inter-organizational readiness, because in these innovations, we always at least have 2 organizations involved to implement the innovation. And I would like to end with the impact. So our research does have impact at different levels. So first, at the practice, our work provides a comprehensive guide to implement those innovations in practice. We also invite to have always transitional care roles and form strategic partnerships between the organizations, and also to always remember to involve the older person. At the research, we would like, of course, I think we opened the road to investigate more inter-organizational links and how do we form these to better implement those innovations, and also the applicability of the results, which could be applicable to other types of innovations in healthcare and other contexts, and to gain more evidence on the effectiveness of the strategies. And at the end, at the policy and social level, our work can inform future policy, specifically on transitional care, and also to promote these innovations to decrease the pressure on social care systems. So by this, I end the presentation, and I would like to thank of course, Maastricht University, my host university, and of course, the Trans-Senior Consortium for this amazing opportunity, and my second university, KU Leuven in Belgium, as well as Capri Institute and the Living Lab in Aging and Long-Term Care, where I performed my whole research. Thank you.
Thank you for your clear presentation, nicely within time. The opposition will be opened by Professor De Vught. She is the chair of the assessment committee, and she's a professor in psychosocial innovations in dementia at the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology at Maastricht University Medical Center. Professor De Vught.
Thanks. So, dear candidate, I would like to congratulate you warmly with a really interesting thesis and a topic that, and also the outcomes of your work can immediately provide also impact, as you already also presented just now. So that's very important to improve the healthcare practice. And I think it must have been an enormous rich experience for you, this trajectory, for you to able to carry out this research, not only with such an excellent supervision team, but also in a very rich network in an international setting with all these PhD peers that you had. So well, it's also it shows off in your work that it was a really fruitful collaboration. So congratulations with that, also for your supervision team. And I was when I received this nice book, I was intrigued by the cover of the book because, well, I'm not actually afraid of heights, but walking on this bridge seems a bit challenging, I guess. With this narrow, open bridge also above this dark, empty void. So can you maybe reflect on what you mean with this picture on the cover?
Yes, thank you. Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the compliments and also for your question. So yeah, the image Actually, it was always in my head to have a bridge as an image because it depicts the topic itself. So it's always transition from one place to another. And also you can go back and forth. And the inspiration came from myself. So every time I cross a bridge, and especially in Maastricht, so every day I had to cross the bridge to go to campus. And I think that time when I thought, okay, a bridge would be the best to put.
Yeah, I can
and
understand.
also, again, the implementation. It's again a bridge, the meaning of implementation science, and also from all that I read in literature, how it's described by other researchers and peers. It's always having an idea and moving to the other side.
Yeah.
It's a bit scary.
And was it on purpose to make this bridge a bit of a challenge and also, I guess, removable? Or do you think after also your work, this can be a more sustainable, attractive bridge that you have built?
Yeah, I think there is hope in I used green because green gives hope, and also, yeah, it's you can go through the steps. There are some gaps, but I believe, yeah, our research did minimize the gap as much as possible.
Okay.
And
all right, thanks.
Yeah.
So the other, of course, aspect of the cover is the title, and you have formulated different concepts in this title, included different concepts: implementation, transitional care, and care innovations. And I was trying to disentangle these different concepts in your work, and I was a bit struggling with that. Also in terms of the outcomes and the results that you present, also the statements that you formulated in terms of we need organizational leadership, we need resources, we need engagement of stakeholders, we need high motivation, commitment. So I thought all these outcomes are then not very generic in that sense that it can apply to all kinds of care innovation. So what is then the specific aspect of the transitional care? So I realize it's a very broad question, but first I want to give you the floor to maybe reflect, to give some first reflections, and then we zoom into one of the chapters.
Yes, thank you again, dear highly esteemed opponent. So yes, the title is quite broad, but it has the key elements of, the 4 key elements. In the main findings and also in the propositions, the key factors we could see, and as a team, and also as I explored in the literature, that they are common to other healthcare innovations, and we always see them again.
Yeah.
However, in conducting this research, the meaning of the factors or the interpretation of leadership, for example, in the context of transitional care is very different from the leadership involving only one organization and one innovation in one organization.
Okay.
So when you speak about transitional care innovations, there are at least 2 organizations involved, and then at least you have 2 leadership. And then this changes a lot in the process of implementation.
And then when we look at chapter 2, you did this scoping review to give an overview of factors that are important for facilitating this implementation process, or factors that are a barrier in that process. So when I look at the figure at page 50, you have outlined all these factors, and as I understand now, it's not so much the factor in itself, but more the content of the factor in the context of transitional care that you think is specific? Or are there also specific factors that you think that are only relevant in this context?
Yes, thank you for the second question. So, of course, many factors are common, but depending on the research and also the different studies that I did and the literature, so there are some factors specific to transitional care. So first is the targeted groups. How the innovation is designed for the older person. This, of course, is the interpretation again, but this was very important and highlighted in different studies. So this was kind of, the common element. And also the second one is the transition role. So in majority of the innovations, transition role, being a transitional care nurse or a manager, it was always a very key component.
Yeah, I agree with the second one. The first one, I think that's more, for me, more generic, but the transition role, I agree with that. But then I had the question, is that really a facilitator in terms of implementation? That I see that more as a key, intrinsic key factor of the intervention or the innovation itself. So why is it a facilitator in the implementation process? Why not, as you also use it in your own definition, it's key to transitional care innovations that they have these transitional roles in it.
Yes.
So I think there are two different things.
So it could be part of the innovation, but the question is, how come it's a facilitator?
Yeah, why is it facilitator for implementation?
Yes. So of course it's a component, and we can also think of it as it's again could be a small part of the innovation and it needs implementation. But based on the literature and the different studies, this factor, transition role, it could be also similar to any change agent or any integrator or intermediary factor that could really help the process between the two providers or two settings.
Yeah. So in that sense, it is a kind of key success ingredient of the innovation. Then.
Yes, this based on the findings of the different studies.
Yeah. I'm not sure, do I have time for another question or? 1 minute? Well, maybe a short answer then to my question, because in the discussion of that chapter, you also state that including, and you also mentioned that in your presentation, that including the care recipient has not been done often in this implementation research. And again, I had the same question. So do you think that including the role of these older persons is fruitful? Are they able to reflect on really the implementation process? Because I totally agree they are important in including the development of the intervention itself or the innovation, but are they able to reflect on an implementation process, or how do you see their role then?
Thank you for this question, highly esteemed opponent. Yes, this was also a question that we all as a research team and in the literature, I tried to explore a lot why we don't, or we try to ask the older person or the patient, but not as much. So it's still also a gap, and our work re-highlighted this gap. And we always focus at the design and not at the implementation. And this intrigued me and also the research team, and we wanted to see also, it's still a question, can we include them in implementation? So I believe the older person or the recipient can tell you a lot about the innovation itself. So even if while it's implemented, there are components of the innovation. So we can always ask the older person what went wrong or what went right. So they can still tell us about the implementation and not only the development.
Okay, thank you. So, well, the good news, the good side of my critical questions is that your work, I think, has implications for care innovations also in general, also for the work that I'm doing. So thank you for that, and I give the word back.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Dr. Thompson. He was a member of the assessment committee, and he's a professor of applied health research at the Faculty of Medicine and Health, School of Healthcare at the University of Leeds, United Kingdom. And a special welcome to you, Professor Thompson, and thank you for traveling to Maastricht. The word is to you.
Thank you, Chair. To the candidate, first of all, well done on getting this far. It's always a milestone. My question to you, Amal, is in your scoping review, you counted the studies that mentioned factors that were barriers or facilitators, and later on you mapped them using a consolidated framework and mapping interventions and so on. But my question is, did you adjust your analysis for the strength and the quality of the underlying research evidence behind those barriers and facilitators? And if you did, how? And just as importantly, why?
Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent. If you could just repeat, so the quality of the factors or the studies, you mean?
The quality of the underlying research behind the factors. So the studies behind the factors.
Yes.
And the strength.
Yes. Thank you. So in chapter 2, in the scoping review, we conducted a scoping review, and it was to explore. It's exploratory in nature. And when we performed the search and retrieved the studies, the scoping review methodology does not necessarily always indicate that we need to double check for the research strength, because it was more exploratory. So we really wanted to understand what are the factors. So of course we had some, we followed our inclusion criteria. And then we also, to make it more rigorous, we used the CFIR, and we used the code book of the CFIR in order to code back. So when we read about leadership, for example, in the paper, we were always coding back, collecting the data based on the code book in order to see if the study is really speaking at the same factor, to make it more consistent based on the framework. So using the framework and the methodology itself explained.
Okay, I can see how that would allow you to describe barriers and facilitators based on what people tell you are barriers and facilitators, but your role as a scientist is to tell us which are more important, and that's surely about the strength of the underlying science behind them. So that's the analysis bit. So just description, how did you decide which were more important than others?
Yes. Thank you for the second question, dear highly esteemed opponent. Exactly. So the first chapter, the first study scoping review was exploratory. So we wanted to explore what are the factors. And also there were too many, 25 factors. So also what would you do with that moving on in the overall project? And this also led us to the second study, the consecutive study, which is the Delphi consensus study in chapter 3. And this is where we wanted to talk more with experts and international experts from different countries to look back at these factors and to obtain their views and to get a consensus what are the most important. So we did this study to answer this and have the priority factors. And we did 2 rounds, and then also we had the final round as a consultation. So we spoke with them to revisit the results and also to have further deliberations on what are really the most important, and also to explore the interrelationships for factors. So this is how we try to go further to see what are the most important.
You should never trust experts. Okay, let me move on to another question, which is, every time you implement innovation, it comes with costs. And you pointed out in your presentation that often when we try and implement, they fail. The implementation efforts fail. So imagine I was the director, the CEO of a large health and social care system, and I want to minimize my costs and maximize my chances of success for my transitional care innovation that everyone is telling me is a fantastic idea, all the experts. So which of your strategies should I use and choose, and more importantly, why?
Yes. Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question. We totally agree also, as in the literature, that the costs, the resources is always a very common, very important factor. And this is what also we were always thinking as a team, and how do we tackle this very important factor. And among the strategies, one key element, key strategy is actually to develop strategic partnerships between organizations. So, and this came from the field of organizational studies and theories. So resource sharing, this is one of the strategies in chapter 6 between the different organizations. So if one organization has an extra resources or could share peculiar resources with another organization for the purpose of implementing the innovation, this could be a win-win for both, and also to mitigate the costs. So this is one of the strategies that we propose.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Wensing. He's online with us today. He was also a member of the assessment committee, and he's a professor in health services research and implementation science at the Department of General Practice and Health Services Research at Universitätsklinikum Heidelberg in Germany. Welcome, Dr. Wensing.
Hello, dear candidate. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah. Congratulations with the thesis, first of all, also to your supervisors. I have a number of short questions on various chapters. To start with chapter 1, you described translational care innovations, and also in your introduction lecture, you described these. And as you know, we distinguish what you want to implement from how you want to implement it. My question is, so what you want to implement is transitional care innovations. My question is, to what extent are these evidence-based in the sense that they have proven effects and not too many harms? That's my first question, please.
Esteemed opponent, for your question. So indeed, in chapter 1, I introduced the topic, and I have a section on describing the transitional care innovations and also on the evidence. So based on the literature, and especially the one I performed in chapter 2, so these innovations, there are multiple studies on their effects, which were, they proved that they are effective in minimizing the transitions and improving the process. And there are multiple effects for these innovations, such as reducing readmission or averting any risk of mortality, improving the quality of life for the older person, their satisfaction, as well as minimizing errors and improving the patient's safety. So we did see this in the literature, and also some scoping reviews that did review multiple innovations and concluded that there are effects. Of course, there are relatively new innovations in a way, so there's still much more room to explore further effects for them, but it does exist, and it is encouraging to implement these innovations.
Okay, thank you for your answer. My impression from the literature is that the evidence in general is a little bit more mixed, that some studies find positive effects and some studies do not find effects. But maybe this is different for your innovations. I want to move on to my next question, which relates to chapter 3, in which you do an inventory of barriers for implementation in an international panel. And at first sight, or at my first idea, was that you want to do this to tailor implementation strategies to a specific setting or target group. But from a previous question, I understand this was never the aim. Your aim was to identify the most important factors. So my question is now, have you been successful? Do you really believe that for the implementation of transitional care innovations, there are a few main factors rather than many factors that are all important? Because this is your assumption that it is possible to identify a low number of factors, barriers, that explain most of the implementation success.
Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your second question. So in chapter 3, we performed the Delphi study, of course, to do some ranking and to understand what are the priority factors. And we did succeed in this. And the final round in the Delphi study, we did it as consultation with the experts to revisit these studies, the results, and then to try to understand if there's any interrelationship. And one of when we had the sessions with the panel of experts, we asked them, if you would choose 5 must-have factors, what would they be? And this is depicted in the figure, in the final figure in the chapter, where there was the leadership, the engagement of stakeholders, the sense of urgency, relative priority, and the financing. So this was, we obtained consensus among the panel that those are really the must-have factors to start with, along the other priority. So if in the future, if I want to advise future researchers or implementers, so at least first to start at these must-have factors to implement the transitional care innovations.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I used to have this idea that there are a few main factors, but I'm not so convinced anymore. I cannot see the chairwomen, so if I talk too long, I should get a signal.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is about the framework that was already mentioned, CFIR. And you use this for your analysis, which I find exciting because it was originally developed for the implementation of, let's say, new practices in hospitals by nurses and doctors, but you use it for a different purpose. So my question is, did it work well for you, or did you have many items that are in the category other, or do you have other experiences that some of these constructs were not very clear or were interpreted in different ways? So maybe you can share your experiences with this framework in this context.
Yes, thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question regarding the framework. So when we wanted to start the research, we wanted to select a framework to, of course, lead us in the process. And we did a deliberate exercise, and we looked into the literature for the enormous number of frameworks, and the CFIR did fit the criteria we were looking for. So it was comprehensive, it's very much used, and they are a rich amount of empirical studies that used the framework in the same way that we eventually used it. And also it had the tools. So the CFIR has a code book, a tools on interview guide, for example, that we used in the case study in chapter 4. And also, also fellow researchers did use it, so there was a lot of exchange of experiences. So was the choice to use it. When using it, we did face some challenges, and this I also mentioned in my discussion in chapter 7. The two main challenges was the individuals, so studying the domain of the individuals. In the CFIR, it's always mixed. So when you talk about the knowledge and beliefs, it could be the healthcare professional, it could be the older person, it could be the leader of the organization. And the second challenge was the CFIR does have silos regarding the domain of the inner setting, the organization, and the outer setting. But in transitional care, there's always links between the settings, and this was also a gap. So to correct for these two challenges, moving on, we split the constructs regarding individuals in two. So for the older person themselves and the healthcare professional, moving on. And this helped us much further to disentangle the factors, the meaning of them. And also the second one, we did include some factors from the care transition framework, which is based on the CFIR, but it does have some constructs that really tell us about the connection between organizations, such as information continuity. So this is what we did in the further studies moving on to go to, yeah.
With a few time, I think I have to give the word to the next.
Yes. Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor van der Weijden. She was also a member of the assessment committee, and she's a professor in implementation of guidelines and shared decision making at the Department of Family Medicine at Maastricht University. Good.
Thank you, Mrs. Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I would like to add to all the compliments made, so I agree with the congrats for you, this thesis, for your supervisors. It's beautiful work. I also liked the fact that you gave us a lot of appendages and the original instruments used or interview guides, etc., and how you visualized findings. For example, this one, page 45. It's really a nice way of visualizing your findings. I would like to go further on the discussion you had with Professor Thompson and Professor Wensing already. I was also intrigued by your objective. I want to find the most important factors in this implementation issue. It's already on page 16. So I was intrigued because it's so difficult to prioritize. You've reflected already on this Delphi study.
Mm-hmm.
You even tried this is chapter 6, to find the priority factors plus the most important strategies. That's even, oh wow, way further. And there you try to do so, I think, with iterative sessions on criteria like how feasible is it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's difficult. You did a lot of work. Could you try to tell me what you think was the best way of doing this prioritizing work? Was it this Delphi or was it that work in chapter 6? What do you think?
Okay, thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question. So indeed, our objective was ambitious to prioritize the factors, but the studies did tell us at least what's important. Can
I interrupt you? Because it told you at least what was important. So how did it go? This last round in the Delphi, can you give me an impression on how difficult or easy it was for the experts to reach the consensus? There might have been a lot of dynamics with, with people who are dominant. Or can you give me a little bit of experience on how it really went?
Exactly. So we had 2 sessions with the panels who agreed to join the sessions, and indeed it was mixed. So we had experts from different countries. So this means from different healthcare systems and different long-term care systems. And we could see the difference, how an expert from the US could see leadership versus an expert from the Netherlands. And the different interpretation, because obviously the systems are different of health services organization. So we did review the methodology in the literature, how to conduct such studies. So we performed them, me and 2 researchers of my supervisory team, and we prepared for it, had questions beforehand.
And it was online, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was online.
Yeah, it was online, yeah.
Because it was also during COVID times.
Yeah,
and international experts. So we would have wished to have them in person, but we did them online. So we did follow the methodology to eliminate any low confidence to express. One of the supervisory team was watching who would not ask. We would prompt them to speak. So I believe, and the research team, we believe we tried as much as possible to have the view of everyone in the panel. Yeah. And we presented the results transparently as they are with the rankings. And this led us to
and now you tell me this, even being online on an online platform might have made things more easy for you to deal with dominant persons. Okay, it's interesting. For the sake of time, we would like to go into another issue, as we think that context is so important and that you cannot easily find generic key factors that work everywhere, every time. You give a recommendation. Let me have a look on my notes. On page 225, there is this recommendation that you recommend to do bottom-up initiatives in implementation. Recommendation 4. No, it's on. It's on page 137. 137. Yeah, there is this recommendation 4. You recommend to do more bottom-up initiatives in this implementation work. Can you give me a bit more? What type of research or models or what type of work do you envision then?
Yes, thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for this question. So indeed, in every chapter, every study, we aim to always provide the practical implications, how future researchers or implementers could use. And bottom up, so in this chapter, chapter 4, the case study, this case study was studied in a more organic way, naturalistic.
Intuitive, you even use here.
Yes.
Yeah. Intuitive approach.
So this is how they do it. They did it, and we really went there and asked, how did it go? So we did not develop the innovation and gave it to the team. We did not control for the implementation in any way. There was no strategies pre-planned.
Okay.
And this what made enriched this case study to understand if there's nothing planned, how would it go? And this was bottom-up manner. And as a conclusion among the team, this was a good recommendation to provide.
Okay.
In terms of the design, based on the literature, there's a move to, in implementation science, to go toward hybrid studies, hybrid effects, rather than controlling the context.
Okay.
Because
thank you. I interrupt you because I'm satisfied with your answer. I give the word back to the pro-rector. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor De Schot. She is an assistant professor in care model development and implementation at the Department of Gerontology and Geriatrics at the University of Leuven. Thank you for coming to Maastricht.
Thank you, Chair. Dear candidates, also my congrats to the team. We can elaborate on that during the reception. I'll take the time for the questions. A lot of questions have been asked on the Delphi study, and I would like to ask one more, and that has to do with the composition of your Delphi panel. It's a heterogeneous panel, different backgrounds I can see, different countries. But as you already said in a previous response, people, let's say, reflect based upon their own experiences and healthcare system context. And 1/3 of your panel, over 1/3, was from the Netherlands. So I was wondering, to what extent has that influenced your findings, and where specifically now you came into the Netherlands, like knowing this healthcare system, what kind of factors could be more prominent based on your overrepresentation of Dutch panelists?
Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question. So in chapter 3 in the Delphi study, we followed based on the literature, the methodology to recruit for a panel. And since the research is performed in the Netherlands, and we used a purpose of sampling and, of course, snowballing to recruit panels. And we started by the research team and also within the consortium to have the panel of experts. We recognized that there was a big number from the Netherlands. Regarding the findings, they could be probably more applicable to the Dutch healthcare system, the Dutch context of long-term care and how it is organized, specifically transitional care. And
in what extent, where exactly do you believe that it might have influenced the results?
Regarding influencing, I think not direct. Like, we can say that it is more applicable, but also we cannot rule out it's only specific to the Dutch healthcare system. So we would rather conclude that it has a more generic manner, the findings. And these factors should always be restudied, re-evaluated in another context, but at least it's a starting direction. Regarding the figure in chapter 3, which highlights the 5 must-haves, we can have an assumption that it's mostly for the Dutch healthcare system, but also cannot rule this out. So I would still say that they can hold in the Belgian healthcare system, for example.
Okay, now my second question would be about the practicality, talking about impact and implementation science. It's one thing indeed to have and develop many theories about how to implement. The other question is how then do we actually do it and how we bridge it to practice. So at this point in the University Hospital of Leuven, where I also work, we have just hired an advanced practice nurse that will focus from September onwards on transitional care. And now I would be very interesting to hear your advice on where we should start with our plan to indeed prevent and optimize transitional care. And talking about context, I would like to add before you respond, is that the complex reality is that our hospital works together in a hospital network with 3 local regional hospitals, but also with 60 nursing homes and with a kind of dozen of primary care organizations. And a lot of your reflections are often based on it's one care setting to the other, and the reality is much more complex. So based on your comprehensive guide and your recommendations that you make, what should be the advice that I give tomorrow to our advanced practice nurse? What's the plan for the next year to 2 years?
Yes, thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question regarding practice. So, of course, we would like as a team and based on my thesis to provide as much as possible hands-on what to do with the findings. So, for the prospective advanced care nurse to work on transitional care. So, based on our work, there are 3 key things that at least could be used and to start not from scratch. So first, we do provide a comprehensive guide. So, for example, if you're looking at the different innovations to get ideas to create a certain intervention. So we do provide, describe 20 different innovations and what could be the components. So this will give basic information how these interventions or innovations are created, what are the key components. So this is the starting, and also the list of priority factors and the subsequent chapters. So I would advise the nurse first to look at these factors. So having them in her mind or his mind, like would really provide a hands, like beforehand knowing what will probably be the factors in the relevant context in Belgium. And since it is in Belgium, also, I would invite the nurse to look further at chapter 4 and also the practical recommendations, because it's very relevant to the Belgian healthcare system. So, for example, the engagement and the role of individuals was very important. It was a very big facilitator to improve implementing transitional care innovations. And also the third one is the chapter 6. So we determined a large selection of implementation strategies that can help also minimize the gap between having a very great idea about how to improve transitional care, but also to do it in practice. So I would invite also the nurse to have a look at those strategies, and we do provide also practical applications. So when we describe how to address leadership, we do say how to really do it in a practical way.
Yeah, and that's probably the challenge that we have, is that on the one hand, you say it needs to be context specific, but let's say we have around 80 organizations with all different context readiness for implementation. Like, do we need something specifically for each organization? Because it needs to be context specific, that's what is stated overall in implementation literature. Or does it actually need to be more a higher level, a general policy at a regional level? Like, do we need a specific agreement with every organization?
Yes, dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the second following up on the question. So, yeah, we believe it's both. So you also need to tackle the inner context of each organization, but also the policy around it or the environment, because the context is overall. So we will need supportive policies for transitional care, but also really to elevate the readiness of each individual organization.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Aerts. She's an added member of the Corona, and she's an assistant professor in data science in long-term care for older adults at the Department of Health Services Research at Maastricht University. Dr. Aerts.
Thank you. First of all, of course, also my congratulations, not only to you, but also for your team, because as you might well now know, science is teamwork. I also want to applaud you with your thesis, especially, of course, it's well written, but I also like the cover. I think it's very simple, straightforward, so congrats. But let's cut to the chase now. We're here for the content, right? I want to ask you if you or one of your paronyms can state your statement number 5.
Yes.
Integration of rising technology, notably artificial intelligence, will revolutionize and improve the delivery of transitional care.
Thank you. Can you explain this a bit more to me? Because how do you see this in the future? I do not necessarily agree with the term revolutionize. I think it should be dampened a bit, but maybe you're the expert and you think, well, we will go there. And can you, in your answer, take into account also the role of the client and the informal caregivers, and of course also the care professionals?
Yes. Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for your question on the proposition number 5. So artificial intelligence, based of course on my continuous learning experience and role in academia, so it is a very hot topic and brought in healthcare as a very promising solution. And I actually did read a very interesting paper specifically on transitional care, not in older person, but general, because transitional care can be for other populations. And AI can have, which is artificial intelligence, can have a big role. I said revolutionize to provide hope, of course, but it can also advance the application.
So you're already dampening your statement?
Not really, not really. I still think it will really improve way the transitional care. The applications I would think is really, for example, triage. So if a person is at home, AI application could be, does this older person need to really necessary to transition to another care setting or not? Another application could be having a virtual assistant to the older person, for example.
But can you take me, not from the examples, but to the role of that client and a care professional? What does that mean to get AI in your house and in your daily profession?
So regarding healthcare professional, I would see AI as also another innovation. So as a healthcare provider, we need to see how the AI would actually improve the function of the healthcare providers. How can it support their daily work, for example, in improving care transition or preventing them? So this is where I see the meeting point. And regarding the second part, the client or the older person, so I believe the AI can have a role of improving their quality of life. So simply if an AI can prevent any transition, this could already minimize a lot of the adverse events that can occur to the older person. So this is another application for it.
I had a second question, but if I may, I will stick to this one. I think it will ask a tremendous amount of knowledge, perception, a bit of a metacognitive view on what healthcare is, especially also for that care professional. Do you think they're up for the task? Do you think, well, this is the AI, this is just another technology, which I do not think it is, because it's extra also regarding privacy and regarding the black box of technology. Do you think those people are up for the task?
Sorry, if you could, are they open for the task, for the role of AI?
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent, for the second part. So AI can be similar to another innovation or simply another guideline. So whenever we bring a new thing to a context or a healthcare system or a healthcare provider or setting, there will always be at least basic resistance, or how do we do it? What do we do with it? So I think there will always be barriers similar to any new thing you will introduce. And AI can have specific barriers for it, example, ethics or the privacy or the fear that it would replace the role of healthcare professionals. And this deserves another study of the AI and, of course, what to do with it.
Amal Fakha, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future than we go. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Amal Fakha, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Verbeek. Professor Verbeek is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite you, your supervisors, to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
I do.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Amal Fakha, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Fakha, dear Amal, it is with great pleasure and honor that we are the first to congratulate you. You have now obtained the PhD title, and not just a PhD, but a joint degree, meaning that you have fulfilled the requirements of both Maastricht University and KU Leuven. That is why we, Theo and Hilde, will do the laudatio together.
Dear Amal, congratulations to begin with, and I wonder if you at all heard the car alarm during the first 20 minutes of your defense.
Not really.
Okay, I guess everybody else heard it. So you weren't confused by it, although we were a bit confused by all the Amals in the first row, because you seem rather alike, most of you. Okay, but let's go down memory lane to begin with, and that's how it all started. You applied for a position within the TRANSITIONAL Consortium, a Marie Curie training network of 13 early-stage researchers, is what we call that. And at the recruitment event, we had applications for more than 100 candidates, and we selected quite a few still, and they all came together on the same day to get a job with us. That was the idea. You were one of the persons to be selected, and we never regretted that, of course. So for the audience, as you may have heard today already a bit, TRANSITIONAL is a doctoral program funded by the European Union, and it's a unique program that is a partnership of several universities, research institutes, and other institutions, such as NGOs, across Europe. The goal of this specific program of research is to respond to the need for research and innovation in the transitional care for older senior citizens and informal caregivers. So Amal, you have been exposed to academic training, academic sectors and non-academic sectors, and also you received training for what we call transferable skills and competencies. And in TRANSITIONAL, we aimed to train healthcare innovators for the future of long-term care. And I now declare that you are officially one of them.
So you can imagine this is a complex system in which the PhD students were selected for a 2-day event. You had to do interviews, you had to do some tests, for example, on methodological skills. And in the first round, we never met. It was my colleagues you've met, including Jan Hamers, one of your supervisors. And he was very positive about you. And I remember that he said to me, be sure to have her on our team, because afterwards we were all discussing the candidates and deciding which whom. So for the second job interview, you took the plane and you flew to Maastricht, where we met, and to meet Bram and me. And you blew us away as well. And your wide variety of experience in working in the corporate sector, working with European Commission in several teaching positions at university in France has strengthened you and made you the perfect candidate for our planned projects. So fortunately, you chose us as well, and you chose with us to work on the project of implementation. And I remember the first day of your arrival in Maastricht also very well, because you came at the end of February during Carnival in Maastricht. And you have to know, people from abroad, Carnival is quite a thing. It's a 5-day celebration rooted in Christian tradition, but nowadays it's just mainly a big party where people dress up as other persons and drink outside. So what a nice impression for you for the first city. So Bram and I talked and we said, oh, we need to prepare you. It's not like this at every time. Maastricht was very different from the cosmopolitan cities you have lived before, like your hometown Beirut in Lebanon, where you're originally from, but also from Paris, where you've lived, London, Dubai, where you've studied and worked before you arrived. And it was a cultural shock, I think, and sometimes difficult to adjust. And the fact that you still cannot ride a bicycle is not helping.
Amal, you have an unmatchable rigor in your work. And you sought to explore the world of implementation science well beyond after everything we asked from you. You have an eye for detail, a true scientific way of working, always supporting every argument with the right references and right literature. We could see this also in your very positive feedback from reviewers when you submitted your papers, who were really very positive in all their comments on your work. You already have 4 published papers in high-impact journals, leading journals in this field, so that's not a very simple and common thing. Also, every meeting we had with the team was very well prepared, often with a PowerPoint, showing the work that you had done and what we had to discuss during the meeting. And although we discussed about your work a lot, these discussions were usually very thorough and high-level discussions, because you had excellently prepared all the things that need debating. Sometimes, Amal, we worried about you, maybe working too hard, maybe little time for social events. But on the other hand, you did find the time to travel, and suddenly you were gone. You were back to London, for instance, or sometimes on a yoga retreat.
And during your PhD research, you had to deal with huge setbacks as well. The first is obviously COVID-19. Only 1 year after your arrival, when you got adjusted and started to settle in, the world stopped due to COVID. You signed up for an international project, with training meetings and conferences abroad, being able to meet the world and involve them in your work. And instead, we were all obliged to work from home and were not allowed to go anywhere. Visits to shops were restricted and normal life was paused. For you, the impact might have been even harder than for anyone else, as you were a citizen of the world, with your friends and family living all over the globe. Your sisters in the USA, Washington, Beirut, London, friends in Lebanon and all over Europe. And suddenly you were not allowed to travel and to visit them. We decided very soon that you were allowed to come in the office and were able to do your work with us, and from there. And also COVID made it even more complex to conduct your research in practice, which was already complex with the language differences. Fortunately, you were able to involve experts in your work and were very active online, participating in online conferences, meeting people and involving them in your work. For example, in the Delphi study, and you arranged other visits to it, for example, also in the UK.
Amal, over the last years, you and your sisters, your family experienced quite some losses. Your father died not all that long before you came to Maastricht to work with us. But moreover, your mother was sick and frail during the whole of your PhD trajectory, and only a few months ago she died. You took care of her when you could, but of course that was difficult, you being here, she being in Beirut, even though you still traveled back and forth, of course. But then COVID was also an issue sometimes. Amal, your mother has always stimulated you to aim high. That's what you told me, that's what you told us. And also to be the best version of yourself. So I think today she would have been immensely proud of you. Not just because of the double diploma and the PhD degree, but moreover because you have proven to be a very resilient woman, and an enormously talented and strong woman.
Indeed, you are a great professional woman and have always taken your own path, also regarding your future. During your PhD trajectory, you have been the main driving force behind your own project. And furthermore, you also took your own career strongly in hands with applications for new positions. You had the opportunity to choose from several positions and have now a wonderful new position as an assistant professor in Groningen. Some of your new colleagues even being here today. From the bottom south in the Netherlands to the upper north, the physical distance within the Netherlands could not have been bigger.
Amal, we are quite convinced that you will succeed in your new job and actually in any future plan that you might have. And we hope that we can be part of those and that we can continue to collaborate in a way. We also hope that you can become a European citizen pretty soon, because that would be great for you, but also for Europe, is what we think. And we think it shouldn't really be a big problem to become one. So, just learn to ride a bicycle, and the world will be yours. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I promise I will try. I tried a lot, by the way.
Okay, dear Dr. Fakha, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. It was a joint PhD project of University of Leuven and Maastricht, and as I understood, you were the ideal candidate to execute this research. You did very well.
Thank you.
Now I close this session.
Thank you.
Is the committee?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And Dr. Wensing in the background.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah.
Oh, hij is wel mooi, hè?